Well, thanks everyone for joining tonight. Well, it's nighttime in Canada. I think it's probably the middle of the day for you in Korea. We are here from the province of British Columbia in Canada to talk to you about self-sovereign identity and ESG, and explain a little bit about a project that the government of British Columbia is working on in terms of responsible sourcing and digital traceability. My name is Nancy Norris. I'm the Director of Strategic Policy in the BC Ministry of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation. Our ministry oversees the activities of a number of different sectors, the mining sector, natural gas, electricity, and alternative energy. So we have been piloting a project for the past year and a half called the Mines Digital Trust. One of the reasons that we have started on this project is because we know that stakeholders and customers are expecting more transparency about where products are coming from and how they're produced. And also investors and purchasers are wanting data about, in this particular case, mining operations that's validated and trustworthy. So we, in the government of British Columbia, we've been piloting the use of SSI in individual identity. And our ministry decided that we would embark on a pilot to try and apply that technology in the mining sector to see whether or not there is applicability for passing on sustainable data about the performance of mines in British Columbia using self-sovereign identity technology. So the beginning of this project started in November of 2020, and we did a pilot, a proof of concept with some early adopters. The team was comprised of a technology company, auditors, a BC mine, and their purchaser. And we created an enterprise wallet that's open source and interoperable. We did that through using Hyperledger Labs technology. And we just demonstrated a use case for this using this wallet at COP26 at the UN Climate Conference last year in Glasgow. We have been collaborating with many different global leaders in the SSI space, and we're committed in this project to being completely open source. So open standards, open software, and open about our governance, the rules that we develop for each of the use cases. We believe that we're testing whether or not SSI is something that should be adopted by governments and used as a public good. And so we are committed to being as open as possible about the work that we're doing and to become interoperable with as many systems as possible. The next slide, please. Great. So this slide includes a lot of the support that we've received from various organizations. We were panelists on a Blockchain Expo North America conference. We've had articles published about our work from PwC, and we've been asked to join the Global Battery Alliance. And then there's also information on this slide about a demonstration that we did at COP26. And we'll play for you now the video that does the demonstration. This is the same video that we created and was shown at Glasgow last year at COP26.
Hi, I'm Bruce Ralston, Minister of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation for British Columbia, Canada's westernmost province. Here in British Columbia, we're blessed with abundant natural resources, including gold and copper deposits throughout. BC is well positioned for the transition to a low carbon economy as we maintain our high environmental, social, and governance standards. Our mining sector has some of the cleanest operations in the world, due in part to our province's clean, renewable hydroelectricity and the high level of industry innovation. This industry remains the largest private sector employer of Indigenous peoples in Canada, providing economic opportunities for rural and remote communities while advancing reconciliation. BC's mining sector provides the responsibly sourced minerals and metals needed for the growth of emerging technologies such as electric cars, wind turbines, and the transit systems the world will need to fight climate change. We're a critical part of the global supply chain, and we're constantly improving on our world-leading ESG standards. That's why we're working to create a system in which our BC mines can easily share their emissions data with investors and buyers. This will provide BC mines and exploration companies with a significant advantage in terms of branding our metals and minerals to global ESG investors. I'm pleased to share with you the work we have done here in British Columbia on the Mines Digital Trust ecosystem.
My name is Nate Eamon Blake, and I'm an Assistant Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Energy, Mines, Low Carbon Innovation in the province of BC, Canada. I'm excited to be introducing this interoperability demonstration of BC's Mines Digital Trust ecosystem. In this demonstration, we are showcasing one particular use case that will be of interest to the COP26 audience, namely, how with a few mouse clicks and keystrokes, a government-issued operating permit and carbon emissions data from a mine on the Pacific coast of Canada can scale into the global carbon accounting platform being pioneered by the Open Earth Foundation through the use of open source technology called Hyperledger Aries. We've chosen this technology as the means for information sharing because it's highly transparent, it's secure, tamper-proof, and immutable. In BC, we have strong climate legislation. BC implemented North America's first carbon tax, and we've committed to 40% reduction of 2007 GHG emissions by 2030. BC is the first province in Canada to set GHG emission reduction targets and mandatory reporting for major sectors of the provincial economy, which has resulted in government-held data about the emissions performance of our industries. In the following demonstration, you'll first see the province making a secure connection with the IBM digital wallet of Copper Mountain Mine, located in Princeton, BC. This will follow with the issuance of a permit and GHG emissions data. This includes carbon intensity, Scope 1 and Scope 2 data. This is the start of the supply chain tracing journey. The information can be amended, say if a permit is revoked or invalidated, but a transaction history will always remain in the system, thus validating the origin of the data.
In this demo, the Government of British Columbia will issue an emissions profile credential from their digital wallet, on the left, to Copper Mountain Mine's wallet, on the right. First, Copper Mountain Mine and the Government of British Columbia need to make a secure connection between their digital wallets. Copper Mountain Mine then asks the Government of British Columbia to issue them the 2020 emissions profile credential for their facility. The Government of BC sees that the 2020 emissions profile credential is being asked for, and they are ready to issue it. On the Secure Connections page, they click on Copper Mountain Mine. They start the credential issuing process and select the credential to be issued. Upon clicking Submit, the data contents are checked for errors and the emissions profile credential is issued to Copper Mountain Mine. Copper Mountain Mine sees the notification, clicks on the credential to review its details, then accepts it. It now shows this new credential in their wallet. At any time now, they can click on it to inspect the details and add a label for it. With this credential, Copper Mountain Mine now has the ability to provide proof upon request to its other secure connections.
The next step is the linkage between Copper Mountain Mine's IBM digital wallet and the Open Earth Integrated Carbon Data Accounting System, which is called Open Climate. Because of the tamper-proof cryptography of the credential, OpenEarth does not need to check back with the Government of BC about the trustworthiness of the information.
This screen shows the login process. The Open Climate portal is asking the authorized representative of Copper Mountain Mine to provide their login credential. It's being done using a QR code. Because it's using the same digital trust network and the BC government is a trusted provider, the user from Copper Mountain Mine can scan the credential and log into the Open Climate system. Copper Mountain Mine presents a proof showing that the BC government has issued them an emissions profile. Upon logging in, the system will detect the information that comes with the Copper Mountain Mine's credential, namely the GHG emissions report, where the mine is registered and from which facility it comes from. The Copper Mountain Mine user is asked by the Open Climate system to confirm the import of the climate credentials. The Copper Mountain Mine user gets to decide whether their data can be stored, used, and disclosed in OpenEarth's platform. Once the Copper Mountain Mine user has confirmed they want to import their data into the OpenEarth network, they are taken to the Open Climate Portal launch page. From there, they can go to the Copper Mountain Mine profile, which shows the specific mine for which they have submitted information and the emissions credential itself. The Open Climate system allows users to understand how the actions they take to reduce emissions have an impact on a regional, national, and global level. This screen shows Copper Mountain Mine's emissions inventory in map view. This screen shows Copper Mountain Mine's emissions inventory, as well as illustrative trades and transfers, and how these scale up to a global emissions calculation. In the credential box, on the bottom right of the screen, you'll see the emissions credentials issued by the Government of BC, which have been transferred via Copper Mountain Mine's IBM digital wallet, and are now nested into a regional, national, and global carbon accounting system.
What makes the mine's digital trust ecosystem unique is our commitment to interoperability, traceability, and open source technology. In essence, we see this digital ecosystem as a public good. The technology will enable our business community, auditors, third-party verifiers to leverage government-held regulatory data and contribute credentials to meet the global market's demand for transparency and trust. In the coming year, we will continue to advance the interoperability of the mine's digital trust so companies can choose whichever wallet solution they wish and still be able to participate in the digital trust ecosystem. At the other end, consumers and investors can determine what credentials are important and who they trust to issue them. And finally, we're excited to continue to contribute to the ambitious work of the OpenEarth Foundation and the UN Global Innovation Hub in exploring how to understand and transparently track the carbon footprint of our consumer products, company commitments, and jurisdictional reporting. Please join us on that journey.
All right. So that was a video that, again, was played at the COP26, and that was covering the work in that demonstration. That was covering the work that we did last year. So we have a new update now on the work that we've been doing recently. My name is Kyle Robinson. I'm the Senior Strategic Advisor for the Mines Digital Trust team. And so now we are in phase 2 of the project. What we've decided to do is move away from that Hyperledger Labs technology, the business partner agent, and instead we're developing a tool called Traction, which is an API wrapper around the Hyperledger Aries Akapai tool. And so that's going to allow enterprises to integrate their line of business systems directly into the wallet technologies for the exchange of verifiable credentials. The one that we, the business partner agent that we had developed or worked with in last year had its own front end, and so it had its own application, and we didn't want our users to use 2 different applications where they're already do have the source information in a line of business application. And so we're integrating or allowing for integration directly into wallet technology to kind of streamline a lot of the business processes for the verifiable credentials. We've also developed a showcase demonstration for Traction. That's all available on this GitHub repository, the GitHub BC Gov Traction. And right, so the other thing that we're doing in this phase of the project is we're using Traction and other wallets to actually implement different pilot projects, different use cases, particularly around the mining industry. As you'll see soon, a lot of that is SSI related, GHG emissions related, and to some extent, the ESG actual credentials and reporting frameworks. The last thing that we're focusing on in this phase is we're working with the Trust Over IP Foundation on the governance frameworks and a lot of the documentation that's required around the governance of the actual business processes and tools that are used in this open environment. Just briefly, this is the Trust Over IP model stack. If you are not familiar with it, on the left-hand side, there is the technology stack. And so these are all the 4 different layers of technology used in the verifiable credential exchange space. The utility layer at the very bottom, that's your blockchain technology. In our case, we're using Hyperledger Indy as that utility layer. And then the next level up, layer 2, that's where we see our agents and wallets. That is where that Traction piece of technology fits. And then layer 3 and 4 are where we actually are doing a lot of the work, both on the technology side and on the governance side for all of the different use cases that we're working on. We'll see a bit more of that in a minute. For the particular use case that we're working on with Open Climate, and we were working with the Climate Action Secretariat, although that we're actually just pivoting, right in the middle of pivoting the actual use case for that. So some of my slides are a little bit out of date here, so apologies there, but we're working through that with our stakeholders and figuring out really who the issuer is of the credential information. So let's see here. Yeah, I'll skip that. I'll skip that. Okay. I was worried about this. I do have the wrong presentation. Give me 1 minute, please. There we go. This is the slide that I wanted to show instead. So what we have right now, this is our carbon accounting pilot that we're working towards in this phase. What we have in this picture is PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC, is going to be the issuer, and they're going to be issuing an ESG style credential. It's still to be determined which specific standard we're going to be using for our pilot, but it's anticipated that there will be multiple formats depending on what the customer, in this case Copper Mountain, requires. So really the business process is where Copper Mountain will ask PwC to perform an audit or an assurance on some of the numbers that they have, and they will ask for it to be done in a particular standard. So GRI or SASB or some of the other ESG standards that are out there. And PwC will have the ability to issue in one of those formats or multiple of those formats. Those formats for those credentials would be stored in the Copper Mountain wallet, and that they will be able to then use those credentials to fulfill any presentation requests that are coming from Open Climate, which is the portal to do that public information display of the GHG Scope 1 and Scope 2, Scope 3, carbon intensity. There's probably some other attributes that are going to be of interest as well. And they will be extracted, those are attribute information, will be extracted from those ESG credentials that Copper Mountain is holding. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about ESG and ESG standards. So ESG investing is something that the components of that really are the environmental, social, and governance. Those are factors or outcomes. And they primarily have been used by investors who are looking at, using those factors, they're non-financial factors, really sustainability type of things, as part of their analysis for whether they want to identify risks or growth opportunities with a particular corporation or company, and really just informs, again, a non-financial piece of information that investors want to know about. You've probably seen in the news a lot of chatter around Tesla and their ESG scores and some of the other companies. So there's a lot of, sort of discussions around, whether it's good or bad or how it's being applied fairly or unfairly. We aren't trying to get involved in that kind of conversation, but we are just looking at the mechanisms to allow the reporting to happen and for the information to flow. But again, there are many different standards. There's pros and cons to most of those. And GHG standards, so that's another term that you may hear in the space. And really that's the greenhouse gas standards or greenhouse gas emission standards. And there's a number of reporting standards for that as well. When we compare ESG to the GHG is usually a large component of the environmental. And so an ESG report will most likely contain GHG numbers or attribute data, speaking to the greenhouse gas emissions for Scope 1 and Scope 2 and Scope 3 and carbon intensity. Again, those are the things that we want to pull out in our pilot to be displayed in the open climate system. These standards are important because it reduces costs for their GHG inventory, and it allows for internal and external information requirements. It's for improving the consistency and transparency for the using of the standards, and then we can have some comparable numbers between different companies and they're actually reporting. So the next question is, how does that ESG and the GHG relate to the use of verifiable credentials and the actual SSI type of technology? So our pilot project, we're taking into consideration the standards bodies that outline some of the best practices for ESG standards, ESG reporting. Again, the GHG emissions, Scope 1, 2, and 3, and carbon intensity are some of those major factors that are being evaluated, and we're looking at developing those into actual verifiable credential schemas, something that can be used to transmit the information from the issuer to the holder and then onto the verifier. We do need to have some widespread agreement, and when we're looking at those metrics and coming up with the standards that can be used. And figuring out how to categorize and evaluate those emissions in our pilot project. That's something that is still early on in our project, and we haven't settled sort of on a specific schema or standard yet. In our research, we came across these 13 example standards bodies. And so really this slide is just to sort of state that there are a lot of different ESG and GHG standards. Some of them intermix or overlap. For example, a number of these standards reference the GHG protocol standards for reporting. Also, a number of them reference the ISO 14064 standard for reporting greenhouse gas emissions. But GRI is a different type of reporting standard than SASB, for example. And then, there's the EPA, the TCFD. There's just a number of different ones. Back to our pilot, when we're working with PricewaterhouseCoopers, we're talking to them sort of right now about what type of standards they follow or can follow. And it sounds like it's going to be multiple standards. and it will be, again, what the customer is looking for. So they may end up with a GRI, and another customer might end up with a SASB. And so we'll have to figure out what that means down the road. If there is some sort of, translation table or compatibility table that can compare those two directly. In summary, the GHG is associated with the environmental segment of the ESG reporting standards. We are working on governance documentation and the schemas for making sure that we're picking the right ones and making sure that it's going to work for the data translations, as I was just mentioning. We're wanting to use, so again, there's multiple standards, but for the format of the data, but we want to use the Hyperledger stack and the verifiable credential, excuse me, technology to transmit the data. So at least it's interoperable from a transmission perspective, from wallet to wallet, even though the standards information may vary slightly. Then we'll cover that with a translation. And most of that work is being done in our pilot by the Open Climate portal. And the last thing to state is that the third-party verification is a requirement of many of the GHG reporting standards. And so that's why the verifiable credentials technology that can be used the most effectively to allow for the trust in the data sources. So it's not where the company is just filling in a form with information, but they're actually presenting a verified credential that's been verified by a third party. In our pilot case, that's PricewaterhouseCoopers. So the trust in the data and the strength in that data is a lot more than it currently is. The next thing that we're looking at here, again, I've got a couple TBDs because we're still talking to many stakeholders. There's just a couple things that I wanted to point out. The Hyperledger Climate Action and Accounting Special Interest Group, they have a subgroup called the Standards Working Group, and right now they're developing an ontology to allow for the comparison of these disparate standards and sort of a translation table. So that's a potential way to solve that problem. I threw this quote in here. This is something from our country, Canada, where this happened in December, where Prime Minister Trudeau was directing a move towards mandatory climate-related financial disclosures. And it's going to be based on the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is that TCFD standard. So these are kind of some of the things that we're keeping an eye on and watching to see, how we can, fulfill this kind of mandate that's coming, and how we can interop with the rest of the world as well, because a lot of these standards are international, and that's the space that we live in today for ESG reporting and investing and trading. Even in the supply chain space, using the ESG standards to allow for that. So that is the presentation. There is our contact information. So there's Nancy's email address, my email address, and we also have a team email address. So please feel free to contact us. Right now, I will stop sharing and we can open it up for questions.